Welcome to the Business of Business podcast. In this episode, Lewis talks to Charlie Middleton, international tax lawyer and accidental whistleblower. Charlie shares his experiences in trying to hold organizations accountable. Enjoy.
My name is Charlie Middleton. I'm an international tax lawyer. I have a LLM from NYU, which is a tax law degree that you get after law school. I have a law degree from Alabama. I went to SUNY Albany. I was in the Navy before all that. And then I practiced law in law firms for 6 years. And then I went to GE for 7 years, where I did 3 different jobs, M&A, and then head of tax for 2 GE divisions. Then I went to Caterpillar, and I was the head of tax for Caterpillar Financial. And then I went to Walmart for a couple of years as VP of International Tax, responsible for tax planning globally. And then I went to Oxbow, which is owned by a billionaire named Bill Koch, and I was head of tax there.
Okay. And so where are you now? You own your own firm?
So for the last 3 years, I have been working on startups, and I have tried to get a job in tax, and I've gotten pretty far down the road on some very good jobs. The demand for tax guys is huge,
yeah.
But the word has sort of gotten out in the industry that I blew the whistle on one of my employers, and that sort of makes you unemployable. And you know, there's a sort of a question you have to ask yourself: do you hide that from potential employers? And that's what I did at first.
Yeah.
But the word's out, so hiding it really doesn't do any good. And being candid about it really just means that, you know, you can't get hired.
Yeah.
So and during that time, I've been kind of trying to sort of advocate for change in the whistleblower world. Specifically, it's my idea that companies have fraud because their employees have very strong disincentive to talk about it, right? So you don't go to a company saying, gosh, you know what I want to do is commit fraud, right? You don't wake up in the morning and say to the kids, you know, today I'm going to create some awesome fraud, right?
Yeah.
That's not how people are, right? But you kind of get sucked into the situation where you see something that's not right, and you'd like to stop it. You'd like to raise your hand, but you know, if you do, you know, you will destroy your career. And so there's a lot of honest people out there who know about fraud at their company, and they're staying quiet because they know they can't get a job. Not only will they be fired from their current job, but they won't be able to get another job. Yeah. And that's the part that I think should change. That other companies should hire people who are fired if they are serious about getting rid of fraud at their own company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's because I want to come on to all of this subject. You know, we talked before about the idea of blackballing, and that's obviously something is subjective to. But for the audience, can we take a step back right to the beginning?
Sure.
What is a whistleblower? And I'd like to get into the steps, you know, right through to, you know, how one would go through the process of blowing the whistle. But let's start with the real basics for those listening.
I guess I would define a whistleblower as somebody who's an insider in an organization who becomes aware of fraud or crime or you know, bad things, and then reports those bad things either internally within the company or externally outside the company.
Yeah. And that could be to the SEC typically, or to the IRS in this case here in the US. It
could be, but it can also be if you just report it up through management, right? I mean, I have it's my opinion that there's some people who are kind of wired like whistleblowers and others who aren't, right? If you're faced with an ethical dilemma and you recognize that if you raise it, you're going to make your boss mad, do you have the self-control to not raise it and just sort of live with the dishonesty, or are you one of those people who just has to bring it up?
Yeah.
You know, so I think that whistleblowing internally is at least as important as whistleblowing externally.
Yeah. So if I'm and as in your case, if I'm working for a company and let's move beyond suspicion, let's say I have evidence, what would be the process of raising it? And what would be the recommendation? What's sort of the best way to go forward, saying you have this, you have the need to speak out about it?
Well, I think that there's a lot of angst in the whistleblower world about the answer to that question. A lot of lawyers would say, don't report it internally. Internal reporting systems are corrupt. People can't police themselves. The people you talk to will not be on your side. They will look for a reason to fire you. All you're doing is painting a target on your back. Don't report it internally. There's other people who say, look, the whistleblowers are trying to be the good guys here. We're trying to be the honest ones. And if you go and instantly, rat out your company to the government, you're not the good guy. You're part of the problem.
Yeah.
So there's, whistleblower lawyers tend. I heard a good answer to that question, which went like this. Almost all whistleblowers initially report it internally. So, what they should do or they shouldn't do, what they do is report it internally. And I think that's right. The right thing to do is to report it internally. It takes some courage, right? Because, I can attest to the fact that, companies will retaliate against you.
Yeah.
If you choose to go external, then you have a whole slew of places you can go. If it's a tax matter, you can go to the IRS. If it's foreign corrupt practices or something that impacts the financial statements of a public company that's traded in America, then you can go to the SEC. There's multiple government agencies that have been set up to hear these, and one of the most powerful is the False Claims Act, which allows whistleblowers, insiders, to sue a company for defrauding the government and recover. Even if the government doesn't join their action, generally the Department of Justice will join the good actions. But
yeah,
so to fully answer your question about should you go inside, I heard a lawyer say, if the internal compliance team is run by lawyers, you should not go to them.
Right.
Because if the internal department is run by lawyers, then they have the protection of attorney-client privilege. So they say they can basically take everything you give them, and they don't have to share it with anybody.
Okay. And so you mentioned the False Claims Act, because the other two would be the SEC and the IRS. And I want to start with the IRS. We spoke before, and you talked about the fear of the IRS. And in reality, that's not necessarily the case, right? So what's generally happened when there's been a whistleblower and an action with the IRS? How is that typically playing out?
So what I was referring to previously was the fear of the IRS. I think is overblown, right? There's a lot of taxpayers who are afraid of the IRS. That they believe that the IRS is this big bad organization, and they have the power of the government, and they can come in and they can crush you. In my experience, that's not what happens. I mean, I'm sure that has happened.
Yeah.
But in my 20 plus years experience as a tax lawyer, the government's generally not unreasonable. Generally, the taxpayer has every single advantage, right? I mean, a well-represented corporate taxpayer has every single advantage. They can plan the transaction. They can decide what the IRS gets to see.
Yeah.
They understand their business very well. The IRS doesn't. And if there's a lot of money involved, they can put a lot of resources onto it, right? I've been involved in audits where you've got $3 million a year partners and five, $400,000 a year associates on one side of the table, along with, five highly paid internal guys. And on the other side of the table, you got two IRS guys. One makes $200,000, one makes $100,000, right? And obviously the amount of money that someone makes is not determinant of the quality of their work. But if, you've got 8 highly motivated, well-trained people on one side and 2 overworked government employees on the other side, it ain't a fair fight generally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so after that, then you have the SEC
Yeah, well, and I didn't answer your question about how do you go to the IRS. So if you think that there's a problem with a taxpayer and you have information, you can file this thing called a Form 211.
Yeah.
And the Form 211 says, I think this taxpayer has underpaid their taxes by this amount, and here's the here's the issue. And generally, lawyers would advise that be a very well thought out, just kind of hand the IRS the case on a platter.
Yeah.
You know, they did business in this jurisdiction. Here's a document that proves that. They didn't pay tax, and here's a document that proves that. You just, if you can provide the IRS with extremely useful documents that they otherwise could not get, then the chances are the IRS is going to take it. The whistleblower office is going to decide whether or not to proceed with it. Then the operating divisions of the IRS will do a thing called a taint analysis, where they'll call up the whistleblower and they say, is the material, attorney-client privileged? Did you obtain it in an ethical way? Did you steal it? If you didn't steal it, if you got it legitimately, and if it's not subject to attorney-client privilege, they will generally turn it over to the audit team. So the IRS goes to great lengths to protect the taxpayer, even in this process. Something which I think is worth understanding about the IRS process and the other whistleblower programs as well. They have a lot of claims. I mean, the IRS whistleblower office has something like 19,000 open claims. They paid last year 30 high dollar claims, the ones where the matter at issue is over $2 million. So, they've got a huge crush of claims, and a lot of them are poor quality, right? Filing a Form 211 is easy. I could do 10 of them in an hour, right? But filing a high quality Form 211, is difficult. I filed a Form 211 that took me well over 100 hours to draft, right? And it deals with every single issue, because if you're an insider, you know every single issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the issue is, particularly on tax, is the business purpose of a transaction, right? Again, and we talked about that before. And so I suppose if you're putting this case together with those highly paid lawyers, it's very easy, almost subjective rather than objective, as to whether it's a case of fraud or what, and you can look at certain transactions as a way in which they are playing to the spirit of the law rather than, again, the objectivity. But that's the difficulty, right? Is when there's the business purpose of a transaction. Is it fraud or isn't it?
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, that is a hard issue. And generally, the U.S. tax code has multiple anti-abuse rules, which say that if you do a transaction with no business purpose, solely for a tax purpose, you don't achieve the tax purpose.
Right.
In my opinion, that is not where most of the tax whistleblower issues are. That is a very nuanced issue, and the IRS that generally doesn't even raise that issue because although the law is on their side, the taxpayer has such control of the facts, and judges have actually been very kind to taxpayers in giving them the benefit of the doubt. This is one of those areas where it's just law that isn't enforced, right? I mean, if you're a well-advised taxpayer, you just get an opinion that says you did it for a business purpose. You recite that you did it for a business purpose. You make up a business purpose. So that the business purpose kinds of issues are not the nuanced places where whistleblower actions are. Whistleblower actions are, they didn't file a tax return, right? Whistleblower actions are, they shifted all their income to a tax haven for no reason, where they've got no people, and they, ignored 3 code sections doing it. That's, my experience, those are the good whistleblower claims.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on then, and I touched upon it before we came back to tax, but what about on the SEC side? How is that? How are they different to the IRS in your experience?
Well, I'm not an expert in the SEC claims, but one of the big differences with the SEC claims is they tend to pay out a lot faster. The average time to pay in the IRS is 9.5 years, and it was last year it was 8.5, and the year before that it was 7.5. Right? There's a bad trend going on.
Yeah.
For the SEC, it's more like 3 years. The SEC pays a portion of the penalty which they collect. So if you tell the SEC about a public company doing something that impacts their financial statements, that causes their financial statements to be inaccurate, and the SEC decides to pursue the company, it generally turns into an enforcement action and a fine relatively quickly, right? The SEC decides relatively quickly whether this is something that they want to pursue the company on. And then, some SEC actions can go on for a decade.
Yeah.
Most don't.
Yeah. Okay. And so you'd mentioned before that in terms of successful whistleblowers, and we'll come on to rewards and things, but you had said that the False Claims Act was the best out of the three if you're gonna whistleblow against any of these three, right?
Well, I think that it's the best design system, right? And oh, but by the way, these aren't the only three. Okay. The Commodities Future, Act, exchange has one. The military, has some protections and some programs. There's other programs of which I'm unaware, but those are the big three. Yeah. But the False Claims Act is the best design because it allows the taxpayer to pursue the government's interest without getting a government agent to do it for them. Yeah. Right. And so in the other actions, somebody who knows everything has to go to the government, and the government has to convince the government to pursue the company. And in the False Claims Act, the whistleblower can do it on their own. If you look at the history of the False Claims Act, initially, the government was downright hostile to whistleblowers, and they sort of have come around. And now every year they collect billions of dollars for the benefit of the government through the False Claims Act. They collect much more than they collect for the IRS. Right. And my expectation is that there's a lot more people who are cheating on their taxes than are overcharging the government for government contracts. Yeah. So I think that demonstrates that the False Claims Act is a better system. Right? The IRS has got very thin resources to deal with all the whistleblower complaints that they have. And they use sort of Byzantine processes, which sort of get in their own way. They have to they sort of work very, very hard to make sure that taxpayer information doesn't leave the government. There's a criminal code section called 6103, which says that it's a crime for an IRS agent to share taxpayer information. And they try very hard to ensure that they don't do that. And that causes a lot of bureaucratic inefficiency. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to, the sort of, the process of whistleblowing and, the type of person that a whistleblower might be. Earlier this week, I spoke with a lady called Chris Doxey, who was involved in cleaning up WorldCom back in 2003. She was telling me about how those in finance and accounting were party to, the big fraud there because of the management team cooking the books.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, typically, because we're talking about putting your career on the line, and on the flip side, there's obviously reward. But at what level is a typical whistleblower? Like at what level of the organization? Because to me, you got to be pretty well educated on the fraud that's going on in order to be able to report it and get a pretty watertight case, right? So my question is there at what level do people become aware and are able to be in a position to be a whistleblower?
Well, I think that you could be at a relatively low level. I mean, if you're a member of an accounting team and you understand the company's books and records, and you understand, so in WorldCom, which like a lot of other accounting frauds, it just had to do with revenue manipulation, right? They just said they were making more money than they were, and So revenue recognition is driven by complex accounting rules. If I agree to buy, $1 worth of stuff for the next 5 years, is that $1 revenue or 5 year dollars revenue, right? Yeah. Well, the junior accountant should understand that issue. I think, though, that most whistleblowers tend to be at mid-level or higher, and because they have the judgment to know what's right and what's standard practice and what's not. They know whether you're cheating or not.
Yeah.
If you're a junior accountant and the senior guy says, look, FASB has said that we can recognize our revenue this way, and this is the way it's done, and this is right, then the junior accountant's likely to say, okay, you're the boss.
Yeah.
I don't know the rules, but after you've been around the block a few times, you ought to be able to tell, right? I mean, Sharon Watkins at Enron saw that Enron was hiding huge liabilities off the balance sheet using, accounting tricks.
Yeah.
And she had the sophistication to understand that was dangerous and it could blow up. She asked the CEO about it. The CEO literally picked up the phone immediately and called his outside law firm, Vincent Elkins, and said, how do we get rid of her?
Right.
Right. And this was sort of days before the company blew up because they were cheating, so horrendously on their accounting.
Yeah.
So I think that they whistleblowers tend to be relatively, senior, and relatively sophisticated, and they understand unambiguously the company's cheating.
Yeah. Yeah. You call yourself an accidental whistleblower. And again, in our discussion before, you had mentioned, and I want to kind of get into this, who is a typical whistleblower? What's the personality for it, for someone who's a whistleblower in your experience?
Well, I only know a few, but having read the biography of several of them, I've noticed that they tend to be serial offenders. Right. Bradley Birkenfeld raised issues at one bank, and then he went and became a spectacular whistleblower at another, at UBS. Yeah. Right. There were Sharon Watkins said that she raised some of the issues that she raised earlier, and they were ignored, and then it got too big to ignore.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a difference between whistleblowers and other kinds of people, but it's a sort of spectrum, right? In my case, the accidental whistleblower thing basically came from at every major company that I've worked for. I've seen issues that bother me, right? And I've raised them in the way that I thought should be raised, right? You go to your boss, and if your boss gives you a satisfactory answer, you stop. And if your boss doesn't give you a satisfactory answer, you wait a while and you go to other people in the organization until you get a satisfactory answer, or until they, shoot you.
Yeah.
In my experience, most companies say they want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's people who mean it. What I see is that if the dollar amount is big enough, they shoot you.
Yeah.
Right. It's really a results-based analysis. If there's some, an easy whistleblower case is, hey, boss, I discovered that someone is stealing from us. Well, that's not controversial.
Yeah.
Somebody else is stealing from the company.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a fraud, but it's not hard to blow the whistle on that. What's hard is, hey, boss, that financial statement that you just attested to as being accurate is not accurate, right? You're overstating our earnings, which is, defrauding investors, or at least giving investors the wrong impression about our financial condition. So, that will likely to get people upset with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because hearing about, this process, to me, if I were in this position, it would seem pretty overwhelming, like the odds are stacked against me in terms of being able to ultimately seek justice. But obviously, you how many times have you blown the whistle now?
Well, I guess it just depends on what you mean by blowing the whistle, but I have raised ethical issues at every company that I've worked at.
Yeah.
And when I have been satisfied internally, I have not gone external. And when I've not been satisfied externally, generally, after being terminated, I have gone external.
Right.
And I agree with you. It does seem daunting. It does seem like it takes courage, but I don't think that the whistleblowers are going, gosh, I'm Mr. Courageous, right? I think what they're thinking that they're in a difficult situation, and each step of the way, they think, well, should I tell my boss? Yes, I should, right? And then, okay, I'm not satisfied with what my boss said. Should I go to the accounting team? Should I go to internal audit? Should I go to the whoever? And then if you get fired, I mean, one natural reason for going to the government is you can be paid, and another one is you're angry.
Yeah.
Right. If you're doing a good job and you have good performance reports, and then you raise an ethical issue, and all of a sudden the company discovers that that you're terrible at your job, right? Well, that's not true, right?
Yeah. So from your experience and personally, you mentioned your current work situation. But what was it like for you going through the process? Like you say, you raised it internally, didn't work out, so you go external. What was, take us through that, without naming names or whatever you're able to do. What was that like? What is it like going internally and being rebuffed to the point then where you're fired? What was that like for you personally?
So if you raise an issue, the response will universally be, thank you so much for raising this issue. It's important to us that people raise these issues.
Yeah.
And we've got an internal team investigating that. That internal team always concludes that the company did anything wrong, right? That self-policing doesn't work ever.
Yeah.
But they don't, the being fired and the raising the issue, or they obfuscate. You don't get fired for raising the issue. You get fired for something else.
Yeah.
One of the companies in which I raised an issue, but I was not fired, it was obvious that they had done a very deep dive into my expense reports.
Yeah.
And they in the exit interview said, we're going to do you a big favor, and we're not going to go after you for flying Virgin when you should have flown Delta.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, yeah. I mean, the companies are hostile to forces that are hurting, that are fighting them, right? I mean, and they perceive, especially SEC stuff, right? If you accuse a company of cheating on their financial statements, you are hitting people where they live, right? If they have intentionally misrepresented their financial condition, especially in a way that's material, such that the financial statements have to be restated, there's a meaningful chance the CFO will get fired.
Yeah.
Right. And the controller and some heads are likely to roll if there's a restatement.
And under SOX, the chance of jail time, if there's enough backbone there, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it's theoretically possible. I'm cynical view of SOX, because SOX has a process where every quarter all the officers are required to attest to the financial statements, and they say the financial statements, accurately reflect the financial condition of the company, and we have in place systems that will detect any kind of fraud. Well, a new scandal comes up every month with a company that's subject to SOX. Heads never roll on the SOX thing, right? So the SOX attestations are routinely inaccurate, and I mean, look at every scandal that comes out, and then look at what happened before that, and then what happened after it to the officers in that area. I mean, if there was a FCPA scandal, then prior to that, a whole bunch of officers were saying, we have in place systems that will detect foreign corrupt practices, right?
Yeah.
Those systems didn't work, right? So those attestations are incorrect either by accident, or I think in many cases on purpose, right? I mean, if a company's paying bribes, someone at the company knows they're paying bribes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And if they're attesting that they have in place systems that'll catch those bribes, they're lying.
Yeah.
Or they're dumb or they're lying, right? I mean, of those, people choose I was dumb, but somebody put it well when they said, when you go up through the ranks of the company, the first thing that they do is they evaluate your competence, right? And so there's a whole bunch of people who are smart and hardworking and they're competent. So after you've determined that people are competent, the next thing is to determine whether they can be trusted. And in many ways, that's the more important test.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at some scandals that companies have had, and you realize that there was a lot of senior people who knew that was going on, and they were all lying for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. Those people have been selected for their jobs based on their loyalty, their trustworthiness, their ability to shut up.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that's why you get blackballed, right? If you failed the ultimate test, you've ratted the company out, right? I mean, and at some point, I kind of hope that companies will be run not on the lines of the mob, right? Yeah. But currently they are, right? I mean, you got to stay quiet about the stuff that you know.
Yeah. So there's two areas I want to get into then that that we're leading into, and the first is the role of internal audit and compliance, because as you say, management can be run like the mob, right? Surely the role of internal audit and or the compliance team is to be independent and to keep these guys in check, right? So what's your view on that?
If their role is, they're starting to look independent, but do you really want them to be independent? I mean, no, you don't. It's self-policing, right? So you want the management wants control of internal audit. They put people in internal audit who can be counted on to support the side. I'm extremely skeptical of compliance teams and internal audit. That compliance teams and internal audit do not detect the frauds where the company's intentionally doing it ever. Right? Sometimes they find, when somebody else is defrauding the company, but it takes whistleblowers to find the issues where the company's is the sort of guilty party. Yeah. And I find that the compliance teams like to adopt, fine sounding rhetoric, right? There's a piece of paper, a mission statement, integrity is important to us, right? And every company has something that says integrity is important to us. So if every company says it, it's meaningless, right? And if you were a bad company, would you have a mission statement that says, our mission statement is to be evil, right? Yeah. No, you'd have one that says that we have integrity. So saying you have integrity is a meaningless gesture, right? It's what you do that matters.
Yes. Yeah.
And we see companies time and again not doing the things that would get rid of fraud. And my personal sort of favorite, my sort of mission is to advocate that intentionally hiring whistleblowers who've been fired by other companies would demonstrate without a doubt that the company has a commitment to integrity, not just fine words, but like action. Yeah. Right. But no one does it. I mean, literally, no one does it.
Yeah. So, in an ideal world, then, if you could redesign internal audit and compliance, what would that look like? Would you advocate for making them completely independent? Is that almost, to go from self-policing to almost having a unit that sits within the organization that is truly independent of the management team?
Accounting firms are supposed to be independent, right?
Yeah.
Independent auditors, right? But accounting firms are lapdogs, right? They're trying to sell services. Accounting firms are never the ones who catch the frauds either. They pass on them, right? Yeah. Time and time again, every single one of the big four has got cases where they knew about the accounting irregularities. They went along with it. And part of it is because you have this, we have rules-based systems. So, this is sort of dates me. There's an old accounting scandal, which would have to do with, let's say that I have a loss, an uninsured loss this quarter of $100, and that's going to cause me to miss earnings. Yeah. Well, there was a financial product you could buy where you'd say, that loss that I already incurred, I'd like to buy insurance for it, and the premium is $110, payable next year. right? So you give me $100 now to cover that, and I'll pay you $110 next year as the insurance premium for that.
Yep.
Right. Well, it's a loan, right? You give me 100 now to cover this thing, and then I give you 110. But they were reporting it as insurance because the rule which the accounting industry had come up with was something is insurance if there's a 10% chance of a 10% loss. Well, 10% times 10% is 1%.
Yeah.
Right. So you could call anything insurance.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what they did. Right. So the insurance, the accounting experts would say, well, we've applied our standard. The standard says, 10% chance, 10% loss. There's a 1% chance of loss here. So that's insurance. You're good. Right. But, any kind of common sense analysis shows, no, it's not. It's not, you missed earnings because you had this loss.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think that independent parts of the company are going to be independent any more than I think that independent auditors are independent.
Right.
Who pays them?
Yeah.
Independent board members are not independent, right? The people love to call themselves independent board members. Well, who chose you? And if you raise hell, do you stick around or do they get rid of you?
Yeah.
Right? Are you selected for your ability to shut up, or are you selected because you're a troublemaker?
Yeah.
Right? I don't think that they're looking for troublemakers.
No.
And that's why I keep going back to my sort of talking point, which is intentionally hire people who are going to put their hand up.
Yeah.
We've got people who put their hand up, even though it is dramatically against their interest.
Yeah.
Right? The company is going to go after you. They're going to look at your expense report. They're going to creatively think of ways to smear you.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, there are these bounty programs where they pay 3% of the people 10 years later, right? It is not a good value proposition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're a senior tax guy at a major company, you're making, $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 a year, right? You're not saying, oh boy, I'm going to, trade that for this 3% chance of a big payday in 10 years, right? Yeah. It's a bad deal.
Yeah.
So if you got people who are willing to put their hand up under those circumstances, if you had a world where it was actually encouraged to report fraud and it was actually valued by some honest companies, then I think you bring the risk of fraud would go up dramatically for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. The only way you can continue to have fraud is if employees are afraid of being fired if they report it.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that then, because on the first time we talk about independence. If we can't have independence in the company, what about protections for employees? Where I'm from in the UK, employment law is very much geared towards the employee. Okay, if you want to get rid of someone, there's a process you go through, and it can take months. Right. You got to have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. California, where I recently moved from, you work at will. I could resign and give you 2 hours notice. I could be fired without reason. So if we can't get independence from the company, should we have better protections for employees in employment law then? And
absolutely.
In a particular case around whistleblowers, if I raise an issue, should there be, protections around me, in terms of going off and finding, like you say, if I've done an expense report wrong or I missed a target in sales or what have you, right? Just, an excuse to fire me in light of the fact that I'm blowing the whistle.
There should absolutely be protections. And previously when I said that achieving independence is hard, I didn't mean you shouldn't try. Yeah. I'm cynical about being effective, right? The person who pays you and decides whether you have a job controls you. You're not independent if you're not independent of your boss.
Yeah.
But yes, there should be whistleblower protections. But I'm also kind of cynical about those because so you raise an issue, your company builds a case against you and fires you. Then you go to the government and you make the company take you back.
Right.
that is not a fun place to work. Right? Like, do you want to sign up for that deal? Right? So I mean, yes, there should be these laws should be in place, but it's certainly not Plan A. What the goal should be is getting to this place where the rhetoric that people say about, hey, thank you for raising that issue, is not bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. We're so far from that now. We're a light years from that. Right. They will all say thank you. In my experience, none of them will mean it.
Yeah.
But I think it is entirely possible to get to a place where they do mean it. Yeah. So if you're in the business of selling, whatever, weapons to foreign countries, and you found that if you bribe the people who are buying the weapons, you sell more of the weapons. Okay, so you could have a bribery program, and then if your employees raise the issue, then you might want to get rid of them and figure out how to keep them quiet, etc.
Yeah.
But it'd be better if you could, if everybody was empowered to blow the whistle, then you wouldn't gain any competitive advantage by bribing because you'd be found out, and neither would your competitor. So the world's resources would be allocated more efficiently because there would be a lot less fraud.
Yeah.
And so if you can convince somebody, some leader, right, Elon Musk or somebody, to say, hey, look, you don't need any unfair advantages. Well, all you want to do is just get rid of your competition having unfair advantages.
Yeah.
So create a culture where you hire whistleblowers. You got nothing to fear from a whistleblower if you're doing stuff right, and the second you discover you weren't doing something right, you fix it.
Yeah.
And the only reason you have to fear a whistleblower is if you weren't doing things right and you don't want to fix it.
That's right. Yeah. It's more about them than what it does about hiring the individual, right? So, would you consider yourself blackballed then?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And blackballing, I think it's worth recognizing that there's not some list, with these are the people who are blackballed, right? Yeah. It's when I go and interview for a job, and they will talk to my former employer. My former employer might say, we're not going to say anything, right? Yeah. A lot of companies say that. And then that kind of tells you something, because even though there's an official policy that they won't say anything, generally you can get people to say stuff, right? Yeah. Yeah. If you're calling and checking somebody's references, they'll say, officially, I can't say anything. Unofficially, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? Right. They will also call the accounting firm that services the, if you're company B and you're checking up on an employee who came from company A, you will say company B's accountants, and you'll go to those accountants and you'll say, hey, what do you know about this guy, Charlie? And they'll say, well, I don't know. And they'll check with their counterparts who are working for company A. There's only 4 accounting firms that really matter, right? I mean, the big 4. The other ones are fine institutions, right? But 99 out of 100 big companies are audited by the big 4, and the big 4 do work for all of the big companies, right? Tax consulting or other consulting. So there's a network, and if I blow the whistle at company A and then I go to company B, and the accountant for company B calls the accountant for company A, if I'm the accountant for company A, I would probably say, well, he raised some issues, and he was a whistleblower, and and he pissed some people off, and I wouldn't think of myself as being a bad person for saying something that is true.
Yes, yeah.
It is true that I was a troublemaker, right? I did raise this issue, right? So then it gets back to the new employer, and they're like, yeah, given the choice between somebody who's not a troublemaker and somebody who is, I'm just not going to hire the troublemaker.
Yeah.
So the process of blackballing is innocent at every step, but the end result is bad.
Yeah. Extremely frustrating as well for you and those others who've gone through it. I want to come back to the reward side of things, because we mentioned Bradley Birkenfeld.
Yep.
And we dropped that name. Bradley, I can't remember what it was. Was it 2003, he disclosed issues going on with UBS. He ended up going to jail, and he was awarded a payout as well. A turn of events in that one. But was his the biggest payout in the history of whistleblowing?
I understand so. He got 104 million, and I think he may be getting more.
Okay.
And there's a guy named Ed Seidel who's an SEC whistleblower, and he's gotten at least 68 million, I think, but he's probably gotten a lot more.
Okay.
You know, not every whistleblower becomes public,
No.
and I'm aware of some matters that are dramatically larger than that haven't reached the end yet.
Yeah.
So, but these outsized awards are certainly the exception.
Yeah.
You know, the total number of awards is a very small number to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. 30 in a year is just not that meaningful.
No, not at those cases, right?
Well, and so I did the math one time on, you know, the IRS estimates what the tax gap is, the difference between the amount that they actually collect and the amount that they would collect if everybody was completely honest. And the last estimate of that I saw was $450 billion. So U.S. taxpayers and companies cheat the IRS by $450 billion. Right. Well, and in a good year, the IRS will collect $1 billion with its whistleblower program.
Right.
In an average year, they'll collect 300 million. Well, 300 million in 450 billion is not even a rounding error. I mean, it's not big enough to be a rounding error. Right? it's 0.00 whatever. And so these programs are not really changing behavior. They're not really. They have great promise, but they're not. The IRS whistleblower program is not real yet.
Right.
The False Claims Act certainly is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an entire industry of people looking for False Claims Acts claims, right? They you know, if you're overcharging the government, it's open season on you.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
If you're cheating the government on your taxes, you're probably going to get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any temptation to go and work in the, you know, let's call them the whistleblower departments of the SEC or the IRS? Do you have any temptation to go down that road now?
I don't think I think that I would be prohibited from getting a whistleblower claim if I worked for the IRS.
Yeah.
Right. So
conflict of interest.
The revolving door only works to the benefit of companies, not to the benefit of the government, sort of ever.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you got people who go from senior government officials to, or, you know, senior or mid-level or whatever, to directly to the industry that's being regulated all the time.
Yeah.
And there are laws which are designed to prevent conflicts of interest. They're not. I mean, it's very, very rare for a government employee to be arrested for, you know, taking information to industry. I mean, I'm aware of a couple of cases where it's happened with the SEC not that long ago. It happened with the IRS about 10 years ago. It does happen, but very rare.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to ask you now is, for anybody listening to this who's sat on the fence, they're aware of something that's going on in their organization, what advice would you give to them?
Well, me personally, well, I think that I would resist the temptation to tell your boss, if you insist on telling your boss, you should do it in a very careful way, and recognize that there's a pretty good chance that they're going to come after you. So really, I would just say don't tell your boss, right? Unless you have just amazing confidence that the company really wants to do the right thing. My experience is they don't really want to do the right thing. What they want to do is get away with it.
Yeah.
So if you insist on doing something with it, I mean, what the vast majority of people do is they ignore it, and they also pretend to themselves that there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but if you insist, go to the government in a smart way that's designed to protect your family and get assets for your family. I mean, the IRS is supposed to protect the confidentiality of whistleblowers, but they don't always do it.
I was
right?
talking about that, yeah.
Mistakes get made. And so you have to recognize that. I mean, I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been Warren Buffett or something that said, don't risk what you can't afford to lose to get, what you don't need.
Yeah.
Right. And if you can't afford to lose your job, don't risk it.
Yeah. Yeah. In principle, then, as a whistleblower, you in this case should remain confidential as the IRS or whoever are investigating the claims.
The IRS is required to try to keep whistleblowers confidential. There's no penalties if they don't, and it's just basically kind of a moral obligation. I think that they take that moral obligation very serious, and they set up a lot of firewalls to protect information from getting in the wrong places, and as I mentioned, that creates a lot of inefficiency. Yeah. But they do make mistakes, and word does get out. And the worst way that word can get out is if people go from the government to a particular company. I'm aware of a case where a person was auditing a major company, and the audit was triggered by the whistleblower.
Right.
So the whistleblower gives information. The IRS agent asks the company formal questions called information document requests, IDRs.
Yeah.
And then that person, that IRS agent, was offered a job with the taxpayer, took that job, and of course, the identity of the whistleblower was compromised.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, in that case, my sympathies are with the former IRS agent. I don't. People should have career mobility. You should be able to change jobs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You should have opportunities. It should be a rare case where you say, no, you can't go work for them because they're just, you can't audit a company one day and then defend the audit the next day. That doesn't make any sense.
So
but let me finish. My sympathies are with the employee. My sympathies are not with the company, right? If the company is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, they can choose whoever they want to hire, right? And if they go after their IRS agent, that's kind of per se scummy, right? They are intentionally. It's not like it's, oh my goodness, we couldn't find anyone else to work for us, so we just had to hire our IRS agent. Right? Come on.
So your argument is that in hiring that person, they put pressure on them to say, hey, who was the whistleblower in this case? That's what you're getting at, and the sympathy is with that person because now they're under pressure in a new job.
Not just that. I mean, if they hire their auditor, they know the IRS's entire strategy. They know everything the IRS knows, right? I mean, they shouldn't be permitted to do it, and if they do it, then they're behaving badly.
Yeah.
Right. In the case I'm thinking of, I believe the IRS consented to it. Right. So some senior person in the IRS said, "Okay, you can do it." I mean, we have regulatory capture in this country, right? I mean, the government is run by big companies.
Yeah.
You can buy politicians, right? It's called a campaign contribution, right? You can hire somebody who was at a senior government job, and it happens for the vast majority of senior government jobs go on to private sector jobs making much more money.
Yeah.
So the system is somewhat inherently compromised. But effort should be made to limit that, especially when there's a whistleblower involved and the identity of the whistleblower is likely to be compromised.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to kind of round things out here and really come back to the story of being, the blackballing, because there's a real sense of injustice, right? Above all else, that you're a good worker, a hard worker. And I'm just talking about you. To anybody who's been blackballed, right? above all else, is a great sense of injustice that here you are trying to do the right thing, and now you're in a position where you're potentially unemployable, right? That's really what it boils down to. And in a sense, it's a deterrent to other people. As you say, I'll paraphrase your quote of Warren Buffett that, don't throw away what you can't afford to lose. And it's a huge deterrent to anybody going up against the man, the machine, to call out problems which the general public would agree should be called out, with good conscience, as investors, as consumers of products of companies that are misbehaving. And yet, for you as individuals ending up being blackballed, unable potentially to provide for family and so on is inherently wrong. So I suppose my last question is, what do we do? What's your advice to employers, and what's your advice to fellow individuals who sense that, have a great sense of injustice?
Well, it's a hard problem, right? Because in an ideal world, employers should be able to hire who they want to hire, right? And we have, as a society, have decided to make exceptions in a few cases, right? If somebody is being discriminated against for national origin, et cetera, then when we've decided that the society has a policy that we're not going to do that. I'm not advocating that whistleblowers should be some kind of new protected class.
Yeah.
I think that I'm very sympathetic to the fact that a person who's building a team that's trying to get some work done should get to choose the people they want to choose, right? So having a mandate to hire whistleblowers, to me, just I don't like it. All right, it's just like the whistleblower, being required to hire the whistleblower back. You don't want him back, and he shouldn't want to come back.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. What we need to work towards, if we can, I don't know how we can, where there are companies that actually value what whistleblowers bring to the table, and one way that I think that might work is just as a start is if every time a CFO or CEO or chief compliance officer gets up and says, we're committed to integrity. Yes, I know we were caught doing some bad stuff last year, but that's all behind us. Now it's all about integrity. And the question is, so you guys have 500,000 employees. How many whistleblowers have you hired? Well, none.
Yeah.
Ever. Right. Well, yeah, okay. So your words and your actions are not matching each other.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to believe your actions. Right. You're not being honest about having an intention to go on to if you're still preserving the option to commit fraud because you won't hire people who will put up their hand when you commit fraud. You're signaling very loudly.
Yeah.
And so I think that if that embarrassing question gets asked frequently enough by influential enough questioners, then we might see some change.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, this has been really great. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. I will put links on the platforms to find you on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. I said before when I spoke to you, you have some great stories and it would make for a fantastic book. I do hope you get the chance to get some of this down. I hope that's something that you would consider. But thank you very much for this.
Well, I appreciate you giving me a platform. I feel passionately about this issue of the solution is hire whistleblowers, right? And I really have been frustrated by the lack of traction that idea has gotten. Even in the compliance community, people push back. So really no one likes the idea. Yeah. So I just need to, I think that, so in my opinion, society is getting better and better, right? 200 years ago, it was legal to own people, right? I mean, we've had a lot of change rapidly, and I think that this is coming, right? That when it's safe for an employee to have integrity, that time is coming. We're not there yet, but it's coming.
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Yep. Cheers.